All right, I'm going to talk about the cleaning equipment just a little bit in cleaning equipment, because you've been cleaning for a long time and you know what you're doing, I think, on that side. I heard the story of a Norman, a disinfection worker up west who's retired now, and he had his fellas trained, because he'd show up to disinfect the warehouse, and if it wasn't clean to his standard, he wouldn't do it. And lovely to see people that hold their ground on stuff like that, because if it's not clean, you're missing the boat. So, and Sophie talked about pressure washing, and we have pressure washers, and it's a simple piece of gear. Talking to different growers just about this, because this is not my cup of tea. You know, like I work on field sprayers, but this is just another sprayer, but it's not a piece of equipment that I'm intimate with. Or I always find when you work with equipment, your models over years, you refine. Every year they get a little bit better, a little more knacky, but a pressure washer is a pressure washer, you know. It takes power to make pressure. And a rotary nozzle speeds the cleaning a little bit, you know, it moves the job along a little faster. Strategies such as wetting down the warehouse before you wash it, just give the dirt a little bit soak time to loosen it up. You know, there's different strategies there. First thing just is there's a hose reel on this one here, and there's no hose on it, you know, because it's a cheap reel. And so if you're looking for a hose reel, I say if it's under $200, it's not going to last 5 years. If it's, next step I have is about $600, and that's an industrial thing, and it'll last a long time. So pressure washer is pressure washer, but there's pressure washer, I say, is over 1,000 PSI. But we have a few growers I talked to that are running old sprayers. It's a high pressure sprayer that's got a 1,000 PSI pump on it, and you've got just a little, that's hydraulic line feeding the gun there, but it's got the components of there's a pressure regulator on it, and he just sets pressure by setting the RPM of the engine. What differentiates, and it's running about 400 pounds pressure. Some fellas are back in the water trucking and putting a nozzle on that, and that's, you know, 60, 70 pounds pressure. That's all you can get out of a gas engine water pump, but tremendous volume of water. That's putting maybe 20 gallons a minute on, and if you're standing in the back room, I'm going to knock you over with it. Or if I say, the other thing I say is, if you let go of that T handle, run, because it's gonna jump. You know, just it's a dangerous. There's pressure washing, and I call it volume washing, and either one they're both effective. And the fellows that are doing volume washing, they'd argue that it's better than pressure washing, but it's clean is clean at the end of the day. So, but this is a lovely way to put an old piece of equipment to work. Takes off dirt if you're cleaning equipment. Takes dirt off fast. Just a little slide I had in my. Okay, this is what we're using on nozzles on that type of thing, especially on the water trucks. They're called a tapered fire hydrant, and the thing about them is that this is 1.5 inches down to a 1/2 inch at this end, and it's smooth bore, makes for a very laminar flow. Okay, whereas this is a fire hydrant nozzle or a fire hose nozzle, but what it does is it fans out into a big fan. Not much force in this. Big wetted area, you know, and if you're trying to chase dirt out the floor, this will move it along, but this one, if you put enough water behind it, will knock you over. This will hurt you, okay? And so there's a right gun for volume washing. Just where am I at? Where are we at? Just, this is one, I found this there, and they had bought an FMC sprayer to make a volume washer. And they stripped off the boom, they got it all ready, and they said, let's see if it's gonna run. They turned it on without checking the regulator that it was not stuck or having the hose open. And that blew that accumulator apart. Oops, way too fast. And one more back. That's 3/16 steel or something like that. You know, and someone could have thrown a piece of shrapnel away. So just be careful when you're using those big FMC pumps. There's power behind them. The tractor's going to give it more than it needs. And just make sure your regulator's free before you venture down that road. Now for pressure washing, this is at Alex's place. It's a 7.5 horsepower motor powering a 3.5 gallon per minute pump. And a 3.5 gallon per minute pump, the disinfection workers, that's what they're putting out, about 3.5 gallon per minute on their through their guns of that style, okay? So it's a hot water heater on it, but it's not a steam cleaner. We call it a steam Jenny, but we use that's sort of a colloquial term. This is just a hot water. Makes, oh, man, makes, so the pressure washer component, that's a $3,000 pressure washer. Add this hot water to it, it's $4,500. Add another 1,000 and you can have steam, and that's 200 degrees and above, but when you jump to steam, you lose a little bit of your volume, okay? The volume will step back a bit. And this is sold by Lingley Welding or Cardigan Bearing Steel sell these, and there's several. I think CTF has a line of hot water pressure. I saw one at your farm the other day. So again, a hose reel on it, just a nice package. And it's more, the point is use it so you get your warehouse clean. Right button. I'll point at the thing. This is, I was looking for a picture of a PCO tank, a pest control operator tank, and this is one of the slides that I saw or found, but I said, oh, that's perfect. I said, I like this guy. I'd hire him because he's got everything. It's got everything you need and more, and it's beautiful, and but that had a $4,000 American price on it, so it's expensive. But what we're looking at for systems, we're looking at, I figure with a 1.5 power electric motor on and 100 feet of cord hose, we're in that $1,400 range without the tank or without the hose reel on it. So, and gas adds a couple hundred to it. So we're under that $2,000 budget, but the tank part is the wild card. So what do you want for a tank? And the PCO tank, that's a flat bottom tank, or it sits on the floor. You don't have to build a cradle for it. We don't need to agitate this general ag storage. It mixes well, it's thin, and it stays in solution. So but he's got a filter on it, right button here. There's a filter leading to the pump. There's the same little roller pump we're going to use. I like the stainless steel fittings that he uses. That's what I've been doing for a while because the system's going to last longer than the pump. You're going to take it apart, so you may as well have a stainless steel elbow there. It's going to last, you can take that on and off 20 times and you're still good to go. So, but it was the tank. Now the PCO tanks, you just can't buy tanks anymore. They have to be ordered. Luke's got tanks coming. We can get tanks in here for the spring, these PCO tanks, but a lot of farms have tanks on hand that they can put to task. So the pricing of tanks, if a little 30-gallon PCO tank is about $200, a 50-gallon is $250, and a 100-gallon is $350. But if that's the tank you want, we have to get it on order through Luke, because Luke's the only fella in Eastern Canada that's buying direct from supplier, okay? Even other dealers are starting to buy tanks from Luke just because the freight is the problem on tanks. That's what it is. I brought a couple 30-gallon cone tanks in because a fella broke one. The tanks were under $200, but it cost $200 to ship each in. So it's to get them here at a reasonable price. But if you don't, so I say look around the farm, see what you have for a tank, because a lot of fellas have a clean water tank off an old sprayer that's sitting there or something they've juggled around. So you may have a tank on hand you can use. That's a cheap 50-gallon tank there. That's what I call it. I use this. This is a little sprout nip system, but there's 2 points. What I do is there's a bung on the bottom here. We could just suck out of that. I have a heater. This is for sprout nip. I have a heater in there. But what I like to do is lay the barrel on the side, cut a hole in it, and suck out so that the water, when the barrel is filled, it primes the pump. It doesn't have to, remember with the old Murtex systems, we had to suck them up and over, and to get them primed when the pump got weak was always a challenge because the roller pumps don't prime. A new pump primes easily, but in this I think is just another way of getting an extra year out of your pump, or another, it can extend the service life. So that's a cheap thing. If you talk to Gordy will tell you make sure you tie it down before you drive it across the road, because if you hit a bump, if it's not strapped in, it'll just roll out of the cradle. It just things happen. So if 50 is what you're looking for, that's a cheap tank. On the larger side, these are a dime a dozen now. Like you can pick these up for. They used to be $100, now they're $75. In all honesty, you probably have one or two on the farm, or your neighbor does. And they make a nice storage tank. It's 1,000 liters. They're marked in graduates on the side, or 250 gallons. The beauty of these ones is they have this little, especially, just check before you say you'll take it. Some North American ones have a 2-inch male cam, so we can just hook right onto that. Some of the Europeans have a European thing that isn't quite as adaptable to go on to. You know, some have a thread, a European thread, and it's a little more difficult. If you're going to pick one up, there's lots of these around. This guy's got 20, a guy up west has 15. If you don't have them, we can source them. And as I said, and you can come right in at them with the forks, so they're easily transported around. Next. And this is where we just cam lock on with the female, put a filter rate on it because we've got a valve there, 30 mesh filter, and it's really just there to protect the pump. The departments didn't have a filter there, but you know, a piece of label goes in there, a piece of something, and then you gotta take your pump apart. It's just, for $35, it just saves a step. But I don't think it's going to be something you're going to service daily or weekly. It might even be a seasonal service, because it's only going to be something that goes in the tank that's going to get caught up in that filter. This one's on top, but as I said, it's tidy on top, and it's not that you can't, but the pump has to suck it up to it, and it's a little more work on the pump. A new one, it won't matter, but as it gets tired, it's just going to be another step. So I'd say if you can get it down below the tank, then when the pump gets weak, you just flood the pump and you're off to the races. The little hyper roller pump, it's an inexpensive pump. It was as cheap as $165 2 years ago, but now we're up in that just over the $200 mark. And you can see that it's directional. The shaft coming out goes this way. For direct coupling to a gas engine, we get a C6500R, which is a reverse rotation, and the shaft comes out the front of it. And there's this nice little stainless steel pipework for it. So easy, you know, and you can rebuild them, but I find that once they wear out, I didn't bring the technical things, but you can assess the case for wear and just see if it's worth putting stuff in. But I found, for generally speaking, it's okay for you to rebuild them, but I can't put the labor in to rebuild them and make it cost effective. You know, if you want to, just by the time you put $50 service on a $150 pump, it's just easy to replace it. Now here's the, with the disinfection workers that run in those guns, they use a number 8 or a 10 tip is what I sort of got consensus of. The next size smaller is a number 6. And it's just one of the little scents that, you know, the old hollow cone nozzle, that's the nozzle. That's a 6, and it's an 1/8 inch in diameter. A 10 is bigger again. It just controls how much water comes out the gun. So with a number 8 tip, we're at 3 gallons per minute at 100 psi. With 10, 4.5. So that's our load on it. If you take a look at the pump chart, that pump spinning at 540 puts out 7.2 gallons per minute, needs 0.7 horsepower. If we want to go up to 200 psi, 5.8, 1.3 horsepower. And that's where that 1.5 horse comes in. I think a 1/2 or a 1 horsepower might do the job, but 1.5, there's not much price difference between those two motors. So now with a gas engine, what we would do is just set a gas engine, we put a 6-to-1 reduction on it. So at full speed, it's about 600 RPMs. So we're pretty much working on that. And then we would just set the throttle to build pressure, okay? And the regulator becomes a safety relief valve, all right? So, and if we're running it electrically, 1750 motor down to 540, that's about an 8-inch pulley down to a 2.5. I put an 8 to a 2 to start, give you about 440. At 100, we still have lots of capacity to run those nozzles. And then as the pump wears, you could take the 2 off, throw a 3 on it, and again, maybe get another year worth of service out of that pump, you know, just by spinning it faster. But there's no sense in starting with an 8 to 3 because you're putting miles on the pump you don't need to, you know. So, and the pulley is an extra $10 to have a second one, so we can make that that work. Next, there's just the layout. There's the plate, the gas engine, gear reduction motor, Lovejoy coupler, and it just makes for quick service. You know, you can pull that apart in short order. It's not a big not a half-day job to change the pump. You should be able to do that in less than an hour. In the electric side, go with cast pulleys, both sides. In the little kits I've done for the warehouse applications, I usually use an 8-inch aluminum pulley, but because we got more power, cast on both sides, a B-belt. I like if I'm going down to a 2, get a notched B-belt, and that gives really good bite on that smaller pulley. It'd be lovely to be able to, and we'll just have to see what the time frames is. That combination is about, oh, I forget what that was, about $60 for that pair, 60 or more. If I get it drilled to 5/8, it's a cheaper pulley, but it's, you know, there's a 3-week delay probably from factory to get it because no one stocks it. This just makes it easy, accessible. So, you know, I use a piece of stringer channel as the base for pumps. That's again in that 3/16 size, and I love it because I put these out 15 years ago, and they're just as square and true as they were the day. You know, you can't break it, or most people can't break it. I've never seen a broken one, but don't leave it to possibility. There's the regulator. I've always used the 8460 regulator as opposed to the solid brass. This is rebuildable, but it doesn't need, if you kick it, you're likely to break the stem. That's the only difference between that and the brass. But the brass is more expensive, and when they wear out, you have to replace the whole thing. I think this is just a better regulator. And I love the filter and the regulator. You've got those on other pieces of equipment. So if you lose your element or lose an O-ring, you can just go take it off the planter or the seed treater. There's the gun. The gun. I like the gun because it's pretty much bulletproof. Like these, I don't know, Alex, how old was yours? You didn't know. It was 20 years old, and they last a long time. Someone said about, when I talked at the disinfection workers, they said some of the girls don't like them because they're too hard to pull the trigger. But this is a 0 to 200 PSI model. There's a 200 to 800 PSI model, which the department had a lot of. The only difference is the spring is stronger on the higher pressure one, and that's where they don't like. But there is a trigger lock on it, so you're good to go. The on-off is way here at the end, so there's when it's very positive on-off. And there's also a fan. You can set the angle, whether you want it to be a straight stream or a broader, by just this knurled thing, so that every time you pull it, it's the same pattern repeat. But if you get into where you want a little more distance, you can wind that back and it'll give a little more throw to it. So for doing things up high, or if you're just putting the ladder up against the bulk box, you can do it probably from the one position as opposed to having to climb up each ends. So it's you know, it's not $200, but it's coming close. But as I say, it's got good durability. Put a swivel here just to make it easy. And there's just where the two different, you can see how you can set the pattern, how it throws. So you can cover a fair bit of ground. And I think the difference between the 8 and the 10 nozzle, you can do the job with them. The number 10 nozzle, a little more water, you're going to have to move a little faster. And we talked about, someone said about getting it wet. Well, we want lots of water so it has that wetting period. Next. The Ag Services General Disinfectant. It is a PCP product, but disinfectants are exempt under the regulations, so you don't need to have an applicator certificate, and ergo you don't have to have an application log. We thought at first that was something that, so it is a corrosive product, so be careful when you pour it that it doesn't splash in your eyes. That's about the biggest thing you have to worry about. And the mixing rates are simple. 60 mils in 10 liters, 600 in 100 liters, or 6 liters in 1,000. You know, and there's only the one rate, so it moves. When I was at the Borden place, they had to fill their yellow 350-gallon tank, and he filled it. I said, "Oh, can I take your picture?" And he didn't want his picture taken, but anyway, he said, "Let me put my gloves on," and then we took his picture because I loved how he put the spout at the top. Intrinsically, I don't know if I would have done that. And they've been doing it so long, they have systems, you know, and they sit the one they're pouring on top of another one, gives some height advantage, and they pour into a fairly large. I have 4-liter mixing containers. I get them at UAP, the auto parts store, not the chemical dealer, and they have nice. It's that type of jug, so it makes it. You want a jug with fairly big base, so if you're pouring it, you don't knock it over when you're pouring. You know. And then they just made a mark on it, just as there's filled to there for 50 gallons. And whether you'll work in liters or gallons, it depends on your, if you're using one of those totes, we'll probably say to there for 100 liters, because that's what the increments on the barrel are. I have a sheet that's within your package there. It's just a little sheet, and you're not obligated for the program to buy equipment from me. And I'm finding a lot of people don't want a system, they want components, and they'll do some assembly on farm. But this is sort of just, these are the typical questions I'll be asking you. We do have sort of a deadline, because I'm tickled pink with that, because then it doesn't get into my springtime, which is just seems to be booked every year. So, but it's more, what do you want for a tank? What type of power unit do you want? If you're going to have electric, do you want it 110 or 240? And most, I'd say 240. Your amp draw is a little lower. How many feet of cord do you want on that motor? How many feet of hose do you want? And so you can fill that out. Get back to me as soon as you can with that. And then especially if you want one of those PCO tanks, I've got to get them. I told Luke in about 2 weeks' time I'd be over to him with some numbers for that. So that's the biggest thing. All right, any questions?